Buenas tardes, mis queridas amigas y amigos. Estamos aquí en la Autoridad de Energía Eléctrica con la Chief Restructuring Officer, Lisa Donaheu, en una segunda entrevista que nos dieron la oportunidad luego de que ella presentara su informe ante los bonistas en el día 1 de junio. Lisa, thank you very much for giving us this opportunity once again.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
I have your plan right in front of me, and since time it's a matter of essence, I would like to go straight. You mentioned here numerous times about third-party investors and third-party operators. How are you planning to get that one done? It will need legislation, and it would also need public acceptance. And also, there's already two PPAs that are in place here in Puerto Rico, like the one in Highway number 22 and the one at the airport, in which those PPAs, they have paid for the part of the debt, and in addition to that, they have also paid for the transformation of the system. Up until now, the two presentations that I have seen, they only want to pay for the things that they're going to be using, but there's no debt payment in their proposals. How do you plan to get all this done in a very short time, too?
Well, I'd say a couple of things. From a process perspective, the important phase that we're in right now is agreeing on the amount of capital to transform PREPA, and then second, getting an agreement on the debt side with our creditors as part of figuring out the shared burden, shared benefit. We then have a timeline, assuming we get to that agreement, where we go out for a request for proposal in the summer. And we'll assess what the best options are. We're looking at the public-private partnership, as you'd mentioned, similar to what Aerostar is doing at the airport. We're looking at independent power producers, similar to what we've got on the island right now, which is Ecoelectrica and AES, which happen to be the lowest cost of power at the moment, and they're great partners. And also looking at operators, both on the T&D side and on the generation side, bringing in expertise to manage these operations. So we're expecting the request for proposal to take about 3 or 4 months. We do expect it will be transparent once and analyzed and determine what's the best opportunity to fund this capital requirement that we've identified of about $2.5 billion. What's the most efficient capital to come in that also brings in expertise. So by, I think our timeline said December 1, we'll be in a position to present what we believe is the best option, and happy to have public and legislative discussion on it.
You mentioned December 1st, and how do you plan to maintain the operation with the cash flow deficiencies that your plan shows in here? Cash flow has been a problem for the last decade at PREPA, and as you go through this process, how do you plan to improve that?
Well, we've already been working to improve cash and operations as part of PREPA. As part of the transformation involves not just a lot of the governance things that are included in here, but it also involves operating more efficiently. And we have renegotiated contracts. We have worked on collections from some of the agencies and corporations as well as the consumer. And we have identified and implemented on real cost savings. So far, cash savings have been just under $100 million. So that's incremental cash generated.
Since you were here, since you arrived, you have come up with over $100 million in savings?
Yes. And the plan has us at a run rate, meaning recurring savings every year, of just over $300 million.
It also speaks, the plan also mentions about the rate deficit, and we're talking about 6.2 cents. Today, the electricity, it's about a 21 cent, 21.2 kilo, and what you should be collecting out there in order to break even, it's around 29 cents. When I saw that number, I got shivers on my skin going back to 29 cents. Are we going to go back to 29 cents?
That's not the plan. slide was intended to educate people on the difference between what's currently charged and if you were to mathematically fully pay for what the costs of running the utility if we did nothing. No savings, no deal with the bonds, no improvements, no changes whatsoever. The next slide shows how we're trying to close that gap and what we're looking at to try to close that gap. And that's the concept of the shared burden, shared benefit. We don't believe that it should all be on the consumer, but equally we don't believe it should all be on the creditors either. We believe it should be a shared proposal where people contribute in an equitable fashion and people share the benefit in an equitable fashion.
In that slide, you mentioned about efficiencies and the purchasing of fuel. And it's about between $70 and $100 million savings, in which, have you been able to tackle this one already? Because, I mean, you're not looking into 2016 and 2018 like most of the plan shows. I mean, have you been able to tackle, because in here you mentioned implement fuel inventory controls. I'm sure you have done that already, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And reduce inventory levels, which goes hand in hand.
And that's a big piece of the cash savings that I'd mentioned, pure cash. That's not a cost savings, that's a cash savings. And that's implementing inventory discipline, inventory controls, min-max of inventory, and keeping the right inventory in the right places at the right time. And that involves fuel forecasting, that involves optimization of dispatch, that involves sales operation planning, working with fuel forecasting, generation, and dispatch so that they're talking to each other and actually planning forward, absent forced outages, how you intend to dispatch.
So that was not in place before you got in?
That was not in place before we got in.
And what are the savings in that area, in that specific area, since you got into Puerto Rico? Because I remember last time we talked, you mentioned about your team that came in. You brought in an additional team specifically for that area. What are the savings in that area for the time you've been here, which is what, 9 months? It's going to be close to a year soon.
September 15th. Yeah. So it's been 9 months. Wow. Yes, 9 months. One member of my team is a fuel and oil and gas expert, and rough justice, because I don't have the numbers in front of me, but from an immediate inventory, there's about $36 million as far as optimization of inventory. Optimization of dispatch, which means generating the least cost unit, most efficient, and planning forward, and that relates to fuel and operations, and also involves the whole network. So looking at the Ecoelectrica piece as well has been about $25 million. And then further to that, we are in the process of renegotiating our contracts for number 6 and number 2, and that amount I want to hold off until we get those signed. We also had a very good negotiation with Gas Natural Fenosa where we were able to put in place index pricing, so a natural hedge in the contract that we can use 2 different indexes, which further allow PREPA flexibility for pricing, and that we're estimating savings is about $20 million.
That is aside from the fuel decrease in price?
Oh, yes, that's completely aside from the fuel decrease in price.
Now, you also mentioned in here about labor union and non-union, estimated about 100 savings a year. And I want to add into that area of labor, union and non-union employees, that from what I understand here, PREPA is running with a $160 million deficit on their pension plan annually, correct?
The $160 million is forecasted forward based on the most recent actuarial amounts. Prior to that, it was about $100 million. That's a gross number absent any sort of recommended pension reform. We're still waiting for the analysis back from the analysts at Milliman, who we hired to take a look at that. So that number is in there because that's the best number we had at the moment. I do expect that we will be working through some pension reform, similar to things that have happened across the island in other instances.
Now, many of the things, as I mentioned at the beginning of the interview, many of the things that we're talking about in here, savings and things that will be put in place and that you have presented to bondholders as part of this plan, they go hand in hand with legislation. And at the same time, they got to go hand in hand with the governor's public policy. And when I read his press release today, I noticed that many of the areas that he covers in here in terms of changes are very similar or in sync with what you have in here. I would analyze it in my program that there has been deep conversations and sharing of information between your company and the governor's mansion. Is that correct?
I have briefed the governor on where we were going and what the recommendations will be, yes.
And he's in agreement?
You know, I think everyone's in agreement that PREPA needs dramatic change. That's been my unscientific analysis from people that I've spoken with, both in the public sector and in the private sector as well. And I think the governor, I don't want to speak for him, that would be inappropriate, but
has he been receptive to your conversations with him and his peers?
He's been very receptive. He has given great feedback. He's been a great thought partner on ideas that we should think about, and I believe he's supportive.
Because I don't see in your plan any layoffs. I mean, I see most of it by attrition. Is that correct?
Most of it is by attrition, and most of it will be as a result of skills, moving people around. There'll have to be some hiring in certain areas. We're very short on linesmen, and that's a critical role. I also think that when you look at the demographics and you look at the opportunity for the retirement, we do make some assumptions on retirement. We make assumptions that people retire when they're eligible to retire, and that is pretty big attrition. So that is primarily where the headcount reductions are coming from.
And I would have to say that also, there's going to be a complete evaluation of all employees in order to put them in the right place, because if you're going to do the same thing with the board and the new board that you're proposing here, I guess you're going to have to do it with all employees from executive director all the way down.
It even goes more than that. It is a concept of a meritocracy, and a meritocracy means you pay for performance. It means that you're in the job you're in because you're the right person for the job. You have the skills required, and you're the best person to do that job. The concept is annual reviews, merit raises, and discretionary bonuses tied to performance and agreed upon milestones and metrics.
So there's not going to be bonuses and payments, like if it happened in the past. And my follow-up question is, you mentioned about trust employees, which in Puerto Rico we call them empleados de confianza. I would say that in your plan they're going to be gone. It's going to be based on skills, merit, and work.
That's exactly right. The concept of, my recommendation is the whole concept of a trust employee is eliminated. People are hired based on experience, skills, and exactly as you said, being the best person for the job and being able to do the job.
How was the reception by bondholders to all this? When I saw the plan, it's music to my ears, but I have to be very doubtful that many of the things are going to get done because of the political climate here in Puerto Rico. And I'm sure that you too, although you're not going to answer that question, but how is all this thing is going to get done? First of all, what was the reaction from the bondholders, and then how it's going to get it done?
I don't want to talk about specific discussions with the bondholders, but I will say that we had a lot of good questions. I think it was a constructive meeting. We are now in the phase where they're looking for a deeper dive into the analysis and understanding where some of the things came from. And I think the meeting was a balanced meeting. And how do I think it happens because of the political environment? That's a tough question. I think that the overarching sentiment, at least that I've observed from virtually everyone that I've talked with, is that PREPA needs change, and PREPA needs dramatic change, and it needs sustainable change. And in my view, in order for that to happen, you really do need to allow it to operate as a business. And to operate as a business, you've got to get the politics out of it, and you've got to put the right people in the right jobs, and you want aligned incentives. You want motivation so that everybody's working toward a common goal, which is an efficient operation and ultimately lowest cost to the consumer.
if we get this plan done, when we can start seeing more efficiency and cleaner energy, and at the same time a lower rate, even though, you look at that and we got to feel grateful to pay 21 versus 29, but when can we see that?
Well, there's different stages in the plan where you start to get immediate benefits. As I said, number one, the operational efficiencies that my team's been working on, you're already starting to see the benefit of that. You're seeing the benefit of that in cash generation, which is your one-time savings, and some of the contract negotiations that I've talked about. Where you start to get your big drops is with the Aguirre gas port coming online, because then you've got your opportunity for LNG. Further in the plan, when you have your newer units, whether they're retrofitted or they're new units, you're getting lower heat rates, so you're consuming less, and then you're getting a fuel hedge. As I said, you have an opportunity to dispatch different units based on what's happening in the commodity market, and you also are getting a more stable environment. You don't have the forced outages that you have now because you've got such an old fleet. So over time, what our goal is rate stabilization and then ultimately lower, because people have been whipsawed by the monthly changes based on, being a price taker in the market. And your biggest driver there has been the fuel fluctuations. So we're looking at ways, as I've talked about, through index pricing, through fuel diversification, through looking for fronting, finding someone who'll front for us. We use their balance sheet and we're able to get better pricing. We don't have the balance sheet or the expertise, frankly, right now to margin or to actually hedge. So we have to be creative and do structuring to try to level out and get a bit of a surety on the rate. So that's the immediate goal, trying to stabilize so people can look forward and know, even if it's a little more expensive, they'll know what it is. They can plan. Businesses can look forward and plan. And then ultimately, as all these efficiencies take place and as we are able to get the new units in and get better fuel diversification and green, that's the goal, to get lower rates at that point.
Now, in the process, will we see a rate increase?
I expect as part of the negotiated settlement, there'll be a contribution from all. And I do expect that as the bondholders are contributing, there will be a contribution from the ratepayer, mitigated by our savings.
Lisa, thank you very much.
Thank you.